Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel where today I'm going to be breaking down the IPA consonant chart. If you haven't seen my video on the IPA vowel chart, do make sure you go over and check that out before, as it may be kind of helpful just to give you a sense of what's going on. But if you are new and you're not sure what is going on, IPA stands for the International Phonetic Alphabet, and today we're going to be tracking down the consonant chart, which is a tool used by linguists, accent coaches like myself, and I'm sure other fields of work to try to understand different languages, pronunciations and accents. There's definitely some faults with the IPA chart, like there is in most tool systems, but it is a really widely and useful tool for a lot of people, which is why I wanted to do a video breaking it down. The first thing I want to talk about is what is a consonant. So a consonant sound is effectively any sound where there is an obstruction or disruption of airflow within the mouth. When I allow breath in, the breath inflates the lungs, air pressure builds up underneath the vocal folds, and then everything around here, the articulators, starts to shape that air into sound. Now, if I move my tongue ever so slightly upwards, there is still an obstruction of airflow, which would mean there may be a consonant. So to put that into practice, if I was just to breathe out, and then I was going to do the same thing on sound, that's a vowel sound because I'm not disrupting or obstructing any air. But if I bring my tongue slightly upwards towards the alveolar ridge, I turn into a consonant sound because I'm disrupting that airflow. So today we're going to break down in that consonant chart what it means, how we understand what's doing the disruption and obstruction, and how it might help you with accents in the future. Let's talk about the structure of the IPA chart. So you are going to see two columns. The first column talks about places of articulation. So like I was saying, we can disrupt this air and that is what makes a consonant. However, the places of articulation is effectively where in the articulators is the disruption taking place. And these have quite fancy, quite intimidating looking names at first, but don't worry, we're going to start breaking them down. Let's go through them one by one. Bilabial. Bilabial effectively means the two lips. So any consonant sound here means that the lips are doing the disruption, such as a p, p, or a b, b. We then have labiodental. This effectively means we are using labio, lips, dental, teeth. So a consonant that may be disrupted here might be a f or a v sound. Then we have a dentalized sound, which is where we are making some sort of consonant or we're disrupting air where the tongue is touching the teeth. T, t, d, d, t, t, d, d. Now, when I give those demonstrations, you might be thinking, oh, she's doing a T and a D. Try not to think about the letters right now. You can make a sound like a T with a teeth, t, the alveolar, which we're about to look at, t, or even way back in the mouth, t. So there's no point associating sounds to letters quite yet. Just think of it as playing with disrupting air at different parts. Bilabial lips, labiodental, lips and teeth, dental, tongue on teeth. We then have our alveolar. Now the alveolar is the alveolar gum ridge just behind the front top teeth. T, d, da 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 ta 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 ta. Any sort of motion towards disrupting air around that area is known as an alveolar. We then have post-alveolar. This is where the tongue isn't quite on that gum ridge, but instead it's just slightly behind, such as sh, j, dr, 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 dr. And then we have retroflex. Now retroflex is where the tip of the tongue is bent all the way back. It's as far back as the tip of the tongue can go effectively, and any sound made with this stretch is a retroflex. All of them could be retroflex consonants. Once we move past the retroflex parts of places of articulation, we are less bothered about where the tip of the tongue is going, and now we're going to focus on the blade or the body of the tongue as well. For example, when we talk about palatal, if you imagine the tongue, you want to think about the middle of the tongue bouncing upwards, yeah, 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 and that is known as a palatal consonant. We're then going to concern ourselves with the body and the back of the tongue as we move on to a velar consonant. This is where the back of the tongue is going to go up to the velum, which is known as your soft palate. G, k, g, k, all of them can be a velarized consonant. Uvula is that funny dangly thing at the back of your mouth. I'm really bad at making any sort of uvula consonants, but one way of thinking about it is Chewbacca's sort of uvula trill.
We're home.
Or I can give it a go and try to feel the tongue making contact there. Something like that. Past uvula, you then have pharyngeal. Now this is where the tongue isn't even around the roof of the mouth, but instead it's kind of going right the way back to the back of the throat. So it might sound something like this. And finally, the last place is around the glottal, which is between the vocal folds, otherwise known as a glottal stop. If you're familiar with some British accents, we would say water rather than water. My vocal folds are doing all the articulation there rather than anything above. And so that lays out all of the places of articulation we can have, which is column 1. Column 2 is about the manner of release. So it's one thing to disrupt this airflow, but how do we then release the air? Firstly, we have the option of plosive. You can think of plosive as explosive. This means that we disrupt all the air and then we release all the air all at once. My lips are totally closing and totally releasing. We then have nasal. As the name would suggest, this is where the air is going to come through the nose, such as a or a for Molly. If I block my nose as I hum that first sound in my name, the sound is going to stop, which means that it's probably a nasal consonant. So technically, if I'm going to start marrying these things together, the first sound in my name for Molly is a bilabial nasal. So it would have to have both of them to tell me that the disruption is happening in the lips and the release or the air is going through the nose. After nasal, we then have a trill, which is where we are simply going to tap the tongue or whatever is doing the trilling in the place of disruption. So you could have a bilabial trill, or maybe you have an alveolar trill, which I'm very bad at, but let me give it a go. Yeah, not good. We don't have that in the English language. It's not my forte. And one that I find a bit easier than a trill is a tap or flap, which is kind of simply like 1 point of a trill. So the tongue instead taps rather than yeah, see, I still can't do it, but you know what I mean. And other than that, another one we have is a fricative sound. Now a fricative is where the articulators don't totally close, and in fact you may not feel your articulators coming together whatsoever. Instead, you may feel that they reach towards each other and there's a tiny gap which allows airflow to flow through. A good example of this is a labiodental, so the lips and teeth, fricative, which might sound something like this. It's not a plosive because otherwise that would be but, where there would be total disruption of air and total release. Instead, there's an ever so slight gap. Moving on for this, you also have lateral fricatives, where the same thing is happening but through the sides of the mouth. The Welsh language is good for this, especially their L sounds, which sounds a little bit like a cat's hiss. And then moving on from this, we have something called approximants, which is where instead of there being a teeny tiny gap, there's a slightly bigger gap. So instead of a it might be a or even if you have an alveolar approximant, you might recognize the sound as a British R. My tongue is reaching up to the alveolar, it's not touching, and there's a good amount of space there. And this can also happen laterally as well. So that hopefully runs down the columns of places of articulation and manners of release. So every consonant sound that you make should form into one or two of those categories in order to fit nice and neatly into a box. Well, in theory, but we all know in practicality that doesn't always work. But what else is there to this chart? Well, in most of these boxes you will see that there are two symbols. So what does that mean? Well, we also have to, or it's useful to figure out, is every sound voiced or voiceless? Voiceless sounds are simply where there is no vibration or phonation of the vocal folds, so it's just air passing through, like a sound. Whereas voiced is where we start to phonate. So even though a f and a v feel like totally different letters, they actually would belong in the same box because it's the same place of articulation, which is a labiodental, and the same manner of release, which is a fricative. It's just that one happens to have vibration, v, and one happens to just be air. Same with a p, b. Both are bilabial plosives. One is voiceless, p, 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 p. one is voice. Kind of cool, right? That's why it's important to wrap your head around the idea that the letters are not the sounds. And that effectively wraps up all you need to know in order to understand the IPA consonant chart. Again, if you haven't checked out my IPA vowel chart explanation, please do check that out. It's two together are really what you need in order to start mastering some pronunciation tips. If you do have any questions, let me know below. But similarly, if you've enjoyed the video, please let me know by giving it a thumbs up, press subscribe, share it with a friend, and let me know what you would like to see me do next. Thank you so much for tuning in, team. I hope this has been helpful, and I'll see you next week. Bye.